Amber Eden, and I'm the editor of a sewing magazine. And today I'm going to show you how to sew with sequins using fashions and styles from the 1920s. And the dress that I designed here is a sequin dress. And as you can see, it looks beautifully finished, but there's some special techniques that you're going to need to do to acquire a good look like this. And as you probably know, sequins are really hot on the runway right now, and as are 1920s designs. This particular fabric is a really gorgeous fabric that I bought in the garment district. If you ever have a chance to get there and do some shopping there in New York City's garment district, they have wonderful fabrics for good prices. But it really does come down to the type of fabric that you choose if you want to get that look. And as you can see, this style has a more contemporary design. It's a shorter hemline. And so you're going to look like you stepped right off the runway if you decide to tackle making a sheath dress like this. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is the importance of fabric. You can go with a cheaper sequin fabric if it's just a garment that you're just going to use one time. But the problem with that is that when you, these sequins are attached, are sewn on, so that once the thread is cut, all the sequins will start to fall off. And so it's not something that is good for, it may be good for a costume or something like that for a performance, but it's not something that's going to have any sort of longevity to it. What you do want to do is you want to go with a more expensive sequin fabric, and the way that you can tell if the fabric is good is that each sequin is individually sewn on. And these sequins, they're actually technically considered paillettes because they're only sewn on one side. Sequins will often have two holes drilled into them. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to remove these sequins from the seam line to actually create a place where you can sew, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be sewing over sequins. It's not good for your machine, and it's not good for the fabric either, and you won't get a nice seam line like you have here that lies nice and flat. And so when you actually remove these sequins, you want to get in there and you want to just cut, and you want to move each one by one. And you just want to get in there and just cut it off, and don't cut the mesh fabric, and just remove it. And what you're going to want to do is, I've indicated here where the seam allowance actually is. You may want to baste in that seam allowance so you know what you're cutting to, or you can mark it in with a pencil. But you are going to want to get all of those sequins out of this seam allowance right here. And once you actually do get them out of the seam allowance, you're going to want to put your two fabrics together here and lay it nice and flat. And I've taken a lot of couture sewing classes, and one of the things that is always so critical is the mantra of couture sewing is pin, base, stitch. So you want to pin your fabrics together first, and then you want to baste. And when you baste, so that you don't distort the fabric, you want to keep your fabric nice and flat, and you want to take these nice little even bites. And when you baste it, you actually want to baste slightly inside the actual stitching line, because you don't want to sew over your basting when you are at the sewing machine. So you're going to move over to your sewing machine, and when you place your fabric in the machine, you want to get it positioned and get the needle down so that it is actually right on the stitching line but not going over the basting. And then you put your presser foot down, and you just want to sew really gently so that you're actually not going either through the sequins or over the basting. And so that's how you would actually get that done. So I want to talk a little bit about sewing supplies that we have for sewing sequins. And the one thing is that I really recommend using Microtex needles that are very, very, very sharp. You can use flexi lace hem tape if you want to get a nicer finish on your hemline. You can use pattern weights instead of pins. I really recommend that. You don't want to be sticking pins through sequin fabric. And for your throat plate, you want to actually use the single hole throat plate, and for the zipper foot, you want to use the invisible zipper foot. And the single hole throat plate, I just want to come back to that. The reason why you want to use a single hole is that you don't want the sequins to actually be pulled down, drawn down into the sewing machine itself. And then have a nice size 10 needle and some good long pins. And the painter's tape is actually really helpful in terms of protecting the sequins, and I'll show you about that in a minute. The tissue paper here, I recommend using tissue paper when cutting out sequin fabric. You'll want to lay the tissue paper out first, put the fabric down, and then lay your pattern piece on top of it. And then you can cut it all out as one piece. And then you can actually sew with all that paper still in place too. It'll make it a lot easier to work with these types of slick fabrics. And next I want to talk about how once you have this machine sewn seam, I just want to show you quickly here. Before you start to sew it, it's a good idea if you put this painter's tape down, because it will actually protect. And any types of seams that you're sewing at the sewing machine, you would want to use this painter's tape, and you put it again just right up to the seam line so that you're protecting the sequins, and it protects your machine too. Now, for any sequins that you end up cutting off of the fabric, you definitely want to save them in a little bag like this. And there are places where you may want to add them back in again. And for instance, like around this armhole, you can see here, there's a little blank space. And you got to watch it, because thread always wants to get caught on sequins, and that just kind of goes with the territory. But you want to get your sequin actually on the thread here, and you can have a nice double thread, and you'll bring it down. And when you actually sew the sequin on, you want to get right in there and go right through the hole. And you want to do that a couple of times so that each sequin is on there nice and secure. And that way, if one of the sequins comes undone, the other one has a chance of staying on. So that's how you would sew sequins onto, add sequins onto an armhole. Now I want to talk about how you actually would put in an invisible zipper. And I know that that might seem like a daunting process with a sequin fabric like this, but it's actually quite simple. The first thing is, one of the most important things is that you want to not sew the seam line below the zipper like you would with most garments. And then, just as we did with the seams, you want to pin the zipper in, and you want to baste it. After you've done your pinning, you want to baste the zipper so that it's held in place. And again, you can see the zipper, the painter's tape here also, that's protecting the sequins. And so once you've got your zipper pinned to the fabric, when you actually sew it, you're going to be sewing right along this groove here in the fabric. And just as a reminder, again, all seam allowances, you want to remove those sequins from the seam allowances, and have your basting, your pinning and your basting before you start actually stitching. So you're going to sew in there right there along the groove. And then I have a really great trick here for how you actually get a seamless look on a side seam or a back seam with a zipper, so you don't have that little bump at the bottom of the zipper because you have this sequin fabric. What you would do is you would actually take your needle, once you've sewn the zipper in, you sew it all the way down to the bottom of the zipper, and then you actually pick your needle up and you move it over 1/8 of an inch, and you continue to sew down the seam line. And that actually creates a nice non-bumpy seam line. And there you have an invisible zipper that's been sewn into a sequin garment. I want to talk just a little bit about hems. You have quite a few hem options. And I would say that if it's just for a costume or just a one-time use, and you're using less expensive sequin fabric, What I would recommend is that you just fold up the hem and you just top stitch it. I've used a contrasting thread, but obviously you want to use a thread that coordinates. And then if you want to get a nicer finish on that, you can actually attach some flexi lace here, and then you sew it right here, remove your seams, and you sew the flexi lace to the fabric, fold it up, and then you pin in place, and then just catch stitch your lace in, and just pick up little bites of the mesh fabric so that it doesn't pucker it too much. And then the nicest finish, and the finish that this dress has, is for a lined dress. And this is where you actually sew the lining to the entire dress, except you leave a place open to turn it out. But here at the bottom on the hem, you can see that the sequins were removed and the seam allowance was trimmed down, and then you stitch the lining to the sequin fabric right here, and you sew it, and when you sew it, you actually get a really, really, really nice finish on the hemline here. And it also makes it a lot more comfortable to wear because sequins can be, even the nicest fabric, sequins can be a little scratchy. So those are some great techniques that you can use in creating a sequin garment that is really beautiful and that you'll be proud to wear time and again and maybe pass down to someone in your family. I want to just talk a little bit more about this garment. As you can see, the neckline is nice and smooth in this particular garment. We've, just as I talked about with that last hemline, we sewed the lining to it and we turned it inside out, which creates a really nice, beautiful finish. And that's just a great way for you to bring the 20s into your wardrobe.